terms of the modern co-op movement, Howard's sort of on that Mount Rushmore, and I'm not trying to embarrass him, but he really is, not just in this country, but internationally. And I'm going to just give you one little factoid about him, just to get you a sense of the kind of guy he is. He was one of the co-founders of what's now a $12 billion company, CCA Global. He doesn't own a share in the company. Like, who does that? I mean, I can think about like Martin Eakes I'm trying to think like, who are the CEOs of billion-dollar corporations? And he's probably one of the 5 lowest paid CEOs of corporations that are greater than $1 billion or greater than $10 billion, probably on the face of the earth. It's interesting from a values perspective. What I want to do is I'm just going to ask him a little bit about his background, because especially for a lot of you that are working in the co-op movement, sometimes you think, are we the only co-op in the world? And like, how do we understand why he got into this, why he chose this? And what I think is really interesting is he's been in the co-op world for a couple decades now. Well, for those of us that are co-op people, where are we going as a co-op movement? And does being a co-op today mean what it did 30 years ago and 40 years ago? And obviously our commercial lending team is growing. What are the things that we can possibly learn from Howard there? But first, I'm just going to put you in the spot. Like, where'd you grow up? And like, what was your family life like when you were a young person?
Yeah. So I'm a New Hampshire boy. I was born actually in Lawrence, Mass. My father was a Ukrainian immigrant. My father came over here with his family when he was 14 years old from Ukraine. And never graduated. He didn't go to school, didn't graduate high school. And my family I was born in Lawrence, moved to Lawrence, and my father worked in the floor covering department at Sears in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And it was his dream to have his own business. He was an immigrant, and he moved our family to Manchester when I was 5 years old to open a small floor covering business called Dean's. And that was his, as I said, you can imagine somebody born out of the country coming with really no money. And so he opened a very small store and on Elm Street in Manchester. And I had an older brother and sister. And I used to go in with my father. Sometimes it's interesting. He was colorblind. Probably not the best characteristic to have to sell consumer products in the fashion industry. But he was, so I would help him. I would go in and sometimes on weekends and assort the tile because he couldn't tell the colors. And so he just loved having that business. He got cancer when I was very young. He got cancer when I was 11. He passed away when I had just turned 13. And my older brother and sister were very academically oriented. And it was always when I was in school, even grammar school, high school, when I'd come in and they said, "Oh, you're a Brodsky." I said, "No, I'm not the same Brodsky," because my brother and sister were extremely smart. I went to my mother at the age of 13 after my father died, and it was a 2-person company. And I said to my mother, "That's what I want to do." I saw my father's pride in the family business, and I said, I want to go into the business. And my mother had never been in the business. I said there was only 2 people in the business. My mother was actually a pharmacist. And somehow she listened to a crazy 13-year-old boy and came into the business. And I wasn't going to go to college. And my sister, who's very wise and very close family, said to my mother, "If Howard doesn't go to college, you sell the business." So I went to college and came back in and took over the business. It was small. It was $100,000 a year business. And I loved it. And it grew fairly quickly. And then I at a young age, became involved with a close friend of mine, a couple other people that started the National Trade Association called the World Floor Covering Association. I guess I was 28, and became president of it when I was 30 or something. And and the company grew from like a $100,000 company to like a $12 million company. But relatively speaking, it was still a small business. You know, I mean, in the world now, all of a sudden, we were competing now all of a sudden with Home Depot and Lowe's, which were billion-dollar companies. And my friend Alan Greenberg and I said, you know, if we don't do something, all our friends in the industry, just like everybody else, are going to go out of business because the big people are taking over all, you know, killing all the little companies. And so we had a close friend who was a lobbyist in our industry, in the hardware industry, and he said, you know, you should talk to a friend of mine who's the CEO of True Value Hardware Stores, which was a big, like Ace, was a big cooperative. And I had no idea, Steve, what a cooperative was. I mean, I literally, you know, like a food co-op I knew, but I had no idea what it was. And Alan and I flew down to Butler, Pennsylvania, I remember, and the CEO was Larry Zeffis, and he spent 8 hours with us. You know, he didn't know us from man to the moon, but he spent 8 hours with us. And we walked out of there and we said, we're starting a cooperative. And we started, our original goal was to have 300 stores. And where we had that goal, I have no idea. We were in the back room somewhere and said, we want 300 stores. And so we started, it was called Carpet Co-op of America. And we needed a brand, though, so we started, it was called Carpet One. And so it quickly grew from, all of a sudden, you know, it was after 2.5, 3 years, we had like 250 stores with friends of ours all joining. And, you know, we said, why did we say 300 stores? So we walked into a Cadillac dealership, I remember, and Cadillac at the time was like Mercedes, or like it's still exclusive, but it was very exclusive, you know, many years ago. And we said, how many stores do you have? And they said, 1,000. We said, Alan and I walked out, we said, we need 1,000 stores. That was our market research. We had very cheap market research. So we walked out and we had 1,000 stores, and that was our goal. And after about 4 or 5 years, we realized that our core strength wasn't anything to do with floor covering stores. It was really saving family businesses. It was bringing scale. Everybody needs scale, and the question is, how do you get scale? And a cooperative model was a beautiful way to give scale without losing your independence. And so we did buying and marketing and training and everything. And so we slowly started to go into other industries. We went into the lighting industry, and we went into, my son came in, went into the bicycle industry and fitness and ski stores. And we slowly went into multiple, 15 different industries over the years. And it grew, and we all of a sudden were in 4 countries, not just in the United States, we're in 4 countries. And then about, I'd say 18 years ago now, Kirsten Moy, who was with the Aspen Institute in Washington, who actually knew somebody very close to here, Michael Swack. And they were talking, and Michael Swack said to Kirsten, she was the head of scaling for nonprofits for the Aspen Institute in Washington. And Michael Swack said, you should meet Howard Brodsky or something. So she flew up, and Kirsten, who's still a dear friend of mine to this day, said, you know, I find your model we showed her what we did, and she said, you know, nonprofits are like little cottage industries. You can't take the executive director out. You know, you think of the local theater, think of the local museum, think of any of the local nonprofits. The executive director is the passion, and you know, you can't combine them. You know, you can't combine passion. But they need scale. And so once a month for 6 months, she brought a different sector of nonprofits in to see us. We presented. She brought community health centers in. She brought arts organizations in. She brought child care centers in. Every month was a different sector. And after the end of 6 months, she said, they love your model. She said, your model fits the nonprofit sector so perfectly. And so we sort of studied, and there was a huge demand in the childcare industry. As you can imagine, even today, the childcare industry was struggling with low salaries, high expenses. The elite could send their children to great childcare centers. If you were poor, you were struggling to make the ends meet, everything else. And so we entered into the childcare world at that point, providing, we call it the CCA for social good. So that's grown from 18 years ago. We now have 36,000 childcare centers across 38 states. And we service 2.4 million children every day. Every day we service 2.4 million kids in North America, in the United States. And then we had one of our board members knew somebody in Utah, in St. George, Utah, that had a very unusual model for homeless shelters. And their CEO came to visit me, and we spent some time looking, and we said, homeless shelters in many ways are just like everybody else. They're all struggling to do their own thing and don't have scale. And so we are now starting a cooperative for homeless shelters across the country as part of one of our divisions, and we already have it up and running, and we're doing that. And so the company is a big company now. We're in 4 countries. We've started, I guess, over the years, 24 different cooperatives. I have my wife can tell you, who Katie knows, Joan, she said, I don't know how you wake up every morning with such gusto, because it's passion, it's what I love. It's a mission. It's a mission to me to bring equality to people and opportunity to people. Small business that I learned from my father is, to me, it's the heart of the community. Amazon and Lowe's and Depot and Walmart, they're not the heart of the community. Anybody thinks that they're not, it's the local family businesses are 95% of all businesses in America and in the world, by the way, not just in the United States, but the world. And businesses that have been part of our cooperative have exceeded the growth of the national chains for every year since we started. So the amount of people, during COVID, 20% of small business went out. We didn't lose a single business that was part of our cooperative. Not one business. And why? Because, first of all, as Steve said, it is unusual and people don't understand. I know there's some people in New Hampshire that somehow think I'm a billionaire. Because I did found the company, I'm CEO, and I just get being CEO, I'm still chairman of the board. And we're now a $14 billion company. So it's a big, and we're very profitable, by the way. We've given back in the billions of dollars in profit. But 100% of the profit goes back to the family businesses. It does not, I don't own a share of the company. And I have a lot of people, they just don't, a CEO of one of the hospitals, I'm on the board, and he said to me, and he's a very smart person, and he said, so just how much do you own? I said, well, no, I don't own any of it. No, he said, I understand you don't own this part, but how much do you own of the big company? I said, well, no. I said, it's a cooperative. I don't own any of it. He said, no, how much do you own? I said, well, no, I said, I don't own it. And people have and I wouldn't, something? I wouldn't substitute it for anything for the world. Because something, when you see the gratification of changing people's lives, of helping them live a better life, whether it's the child care center or a ski store, and I don't know how many people have said, I wouldn't have the life I have without it. My family wouldn't be in the business. We saw When we started the business, young children were not coming into the business. They said, oh, it's a bad business. There's no success in this business, nowhere to go. We have now the families coming in. They're lawyers. They worked in Wall Street. They're coming into all the different family businesses because there's opportunity. We have one of our members, Richard Akel from Little Rock, Arkansas. He started with us when he was a $600,000 dealer, and today he does $100 million. And he's, and the other part is they give back to their communities. You wouldn't believe the care that they to give back to their communities. And so the cooperative, when Steve was talking about, I do believe that in some ways, the ad you see for Buick that says, it's not my father's Buick or something. It was one of the stories, and I believe we're not your image of a co-op, because I think somehow co-ops, it's one of the problems with co-ops is the image. People think of it as an old model. They think of it as like, oh, it's my local, and food co-ops are good, but they think of it as like, oh, it's like, this is a little mom and pop thing. Well, there's 1 billion members of co-ops in the world. It's 12% of the world's economy. 12% of the world economy is co-ops, and 250 million people in the world work for co-ops. And it is the most sustainable model. But what I see now, and I think it's part of what hopefully we've done and new people are doing, there's creative ways to take the cooperative model, because our system, capitalism, is broken, terribly broken. The United States has the greatest level of inequality of any country, of developed countries in the world. And that's not something we should be proud of. And in the last just 4 years, the billionaires in America, the top 5 people, the richest people, their wealth grew at the average rate of $14 million an hour, okay? In the world, 5 billion people became poor. So we have 5 billion became poorer, and 5 people became richer by 14 million. Those 5 people have the same wealth as half the world's population. So you could go in a car right now and take 5 people, and you take half the world, and they're as rich as half the world. That doesn't work anymore. That is a broken system. And what I would say is, I call cooperatives capitalism with a conscience. We're very entrepreneurial, I can say it. We are extremely entrepreneurial company. We are a very driven company, but it's with a conscience. It's with that the money should be distributed back to everybody. It should go to people that are earning it, not the people that are just making money off money. And so the cooperative model, and it's interesting, the United Nations in 2025 has just announced, it's being officially announced, but it's going to be the International Year of Cooperatives by United Nations. The United Nations is blessing, they know it's I was there just recently at the United Nations, and it is the only model, economic model, that aligns with the United Nations goals of sustainability. Sustainability for the environment, sustainability for social, economic, sustainability of almost all the United Nations goals. And so they are blessing and making 2025 the International Year of the Cooperative. And so, and as I said, I'll just tell you one wonderful story to give you an idea of the inspiration, what I think what cooperatives can do. And you can see a product right here in Concord about it. So in Togo, West Africa, as in many African countries, women drop out of school very early. Literally at the age of 9, 10, 11 is not unusual for women to stop schooling. And they had a lot of shea nut butter trees in Togo, West Africa. And so thousands of women would go to where the nuts are in the ground every day, individually, pick up the nuts in the bags, take them to the market, and sell at the market to company representatives. They're living in poverty, poverty. Togo's not a very wealthy country, living in poverty. Somebody was there from the United Nations, this is back not 18 years ago, 19 years ago, and said, I think there's a role for a cooperative here. And got together 400 of the women and said, something, instead of you taking your nuts to the market every day, we're going to build just a little warehouse, and you bring the nuts to the warehouse, and we're going to get some volume and scale here, and we're going to sell your nuts at a higher price because, there's an opportunity with scale to have a higher price. And all of a sudden, it went from those 400 women that were doing what women, very frequent in a lot of countries, in poorer countries, in developing countries, are happening. Today, it's called Alafia Cooperative in Togo, West Africa. They have 9,000 women that belong. They make 400% of what they were making. Not 5% more, 400% more. They built 11 schools, the cooperative built 11 schools, bought 9,000 bicycles for kids to ride to the schools, okay? Have health insurance for all their workers, and the workers, the women, the 9,000 women only Alafia shea butter. And I don't know if it's still available, but it was. If you go down to the Concord Food Co-op, guess what? You will find Alafia shea butter. So the power of a cooperative was they took what people were doing, and I call it the extraction economy. Extraction economy is when big companies are taking, the women are doing all the work. What they were doing is taking advantage, they didn't have scale. And so what a cooperative did, it gave amazing scale to people. And so these women all of a sudden had power and had control of their own destiny. And they all of a sudden built their own product line. So not only were they able to get much more money because of the scale, but they become the end user. So the Alafia shea butter is sold all across North America and in other countries. And what a wonderful story, what a cooperative can do. And as I said, I've seen the power of, recently I was invited to be up in Winnipeg, Canada. They're there for housing cooperatives in Winnipeg. They're national for Canada. So Canada has 2,200 housing cooperatives. Separate, not individuals, 2,200. Canada, that's 1/10 the size of America, the United States, has 2,200. I was invited to be the speaker there. And the dedication and what they do for their tenants and their commitment to having a more socially just and living environment, housing environment that's right. And the day before I got there, and it shows the difference between our government and the Canadian government had just passed a bill to give $1.5 billion to the housing cooperatives. $1.5 billion to housing cooperatives in Canada. Now, to get $1.5 billion out of Washington, we would have to take all our blood, soul, commit our past children and future children. It would be, but there's so much wonderful work being done with cooperatives, socially justice, and I'm fortunate to be involved internationally, and I'm chairman of the International Cooperative Alliance, which is the global umbrella for cooperatives around the world. Appointed a committee to meet with the G20 countries when the G20 meets every year on big policy changes, and they appointed the leaders from all the countries, the leading cooperative people, to meet with the G20 in order to try to influence policy to have more cooperatives. And I was fortunate that I'm the global chairman of that. And it is exciting to see written into G20 countries now, their policy, that cooperatives are going to be more of a role in many, many, many countries. So it's, and I think we've reached a point where, as I said, the capitalism system, it's not that we're not going to get rid of it, but it needs a barometer to say, you can't have so much inequality happening from it. And I literally getting a call once a week of people that want to start a cooperative in different models, and exciting models. And I think you're going to see enormous growth in contemporary cooperatives happening now. In so many, I'll give you just my son Greg, who Katie knows very well, went to school with Greg, and played in the same soccer team. So it goes back. New Hampshire's a small place. I coached my son's soccer with Katie's mother. We were co-coaches.
Neither of us went on to greatness.
Right. Right. But Greg has started an incubator for starting new cooperatives called Start.coop. And you might just look at it because it's fascinating what they're doing. So they incubate 6 to 8 new cooperatives every year. But to give you an idea of one that's reached enormous scale, we all know Uber and Lyft, all throughout the world now. But Uber and Lyft, I call it, is part of the extraction economy. It's a technology, and they take off the top of drivers 35 to 40%. I don't know if you're aware of that. They take right off the top of what they make. So, if you're paying $15 for a ride, Uber's taking 40% of that. They take before the driver gets anything. Sometimes 35, sometimes 38, 32, but, roughly in that range. And except for the very top fancy cars, the black car drivers, most regular Uber X's and Uber all the other, a lot of them making minimum wage. You take the car, the insurance, the tires, the wear and tear, and their own labor. They've done analysis. A lot of them, it's less than minimum wage that they make. And so there was a group of drivers in New Jersey, in New York, and they said, the technology is not that sophisticated anymore. It's location-based technology. It was sophisticated when they started, but it's not anymore. And they said, we could own the technology. So a group of drivers got together. They worked with Greg, and they went through his incubator called drivers.coop, and they started their own Uber and Lyft in New York City. And today, 8,000 drivers are part of the cooperative. And they make, doing the same ride, getting in the same car, picking you up, and taking you to the same place, they make 35% more because they own it.
Right.
Because they own it. And I always say, ownership matters. Ownership matters. And I hear he's got some incubator ones that are coming. And there's another one, like Uber Eats. There's one in Canada that's going to start coming here, a cooperative called Radish. It's a good name for a delivery company. It's a combination, it's a co-op owned by the drivers and the restaurant together. And what the interesting thing is, not only are they making more money, it costs the restaurant less money, the drivers are making more money, but the efficiency, apparently, and I never followed it, but X amount of Uber Eats goes to the wrong address or at the wrong time, the food gets bad. Their efficiency is like 75% better because they own it. And it's a great group of guys, and they're outside of Montreal that have started it, and they've already got the software built, and they're going to take it to other places. But there's such an opportunity to make cooperatives in so many sectors of our business where it's people-centered, where the people have control of their own destiny. They have control of what they make in money. They have just greater opportunity. And, we live in a world where people don't feel in control. And they feel, so many things out of my control. And it's interesting, Lou Feldstein, who I'm sure you know, and who was really one of the founder. He grew the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation to be this wonderful thing. And Lou wrote a book with Robert Parsons. And Robert Parsons is a well-known educator out of Harvard. And they wrote a book together called Stronger Together. And they actually talk about cooperatives. But Robert Parsons actually has just come out with there's a documentary movie about him. That actually, my wife and I are trying to get, I think we're going to get it to be played at the Red River Theater. And we invite all of you to come for free. We're going to host it. But it's all about, and the reason I say it's about the people in the United States today and around the world are lonely. And the loneliness, it's interesting, they just did a study by the Surgeon General in the United States and other studies too, that loneliness has the same effect as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Your death rate is the same rate by being lonely as having diabetes. And one of the things that combats that is being part of an organization. And a cooperative is you're part of something. Look at one of the things that the Community Loan Fund started, and I know it's a different thing, is ROC, which I think is one of the most wonderful things in the world. And people used to be subject to the land prices. They had, first of all, no sense of community and no sense of ownership and no sense of control of their own destiny of what the economics were going to be because, abusive landowners kept on raising the price. And yet, with ROC, not only do they own it, but it is a community. I visited some of the ones with Paul Bradley and seen the owners and how much pride. They build a community of their ownership. They meet together, they talk together, they plan together. That is community. What you do is what you call the Community Loan Fund. Community combats loneliness. And so in so many ways, you're making people healthier. Really, their longevity, and it's not a minor thing. As I said, it's a crisis in the United States, the loneliness.
I just want to be mindful of time to see if we have any questions do we want to open up for questions? I know you probably have some.
I do, but I'll let y'all go first because there's one biggie I want to hit him with. Because Pete and then Nick.
So in this model that you have, clearly the big players, the five, do they see this model as a threat to their profitability, and are there headwinds that you have to, go up against to try and replicate your model across the country? And I'm talking basically the U.S.
Yeah, it's a good question. What I would say is the biggest barrier to cooperatives growing quicker is the lack of capital structure. Because they rarely go out of business. We know they do good, but there's no big, what I call liquidity event. If somebody wants to go public, they're not going public. I don't think big companies don't look at cooperatives as a threat. They don't really understand them, and they're so concerned about their own money that they play in their own sandbox. So I don't think it's big companies, but I think cooperatives could grow quicker with access to more patient capital.
Yeah. Nick.
So the question I have, I think you spoke to it a little bit, but so those industries that you've gone into with cooperatives, what have you seen for growth in the actual industry. So like obviously there were these smaller disparate things that have come together and become part of the cooperative. And I'm also thinking specifically in the nonprofit space, thinking of like the, you know, the homeless shelters.
Yeah.
Do you expect to see more individuals standing up homeless shelters with this, because there'll be the support of this cooperative?
Yeah, it's a good question. Most of the time, what I would say we have done is leverage the existing ability of existing organizations to be stronger financially, have higher growth, and for them to grow quicker and at a more stable environment. Some new ones have come in because the structure's there. It's less about, I think, the new ones coming in than it is about the ones that are there but maybe weren't well run or needed more tools to run it, needed more ability for training or marketing or, you know, technology. With today, look at with technology today, everybody's going to need to scale it and just a whole new world. I mean, AI is going to change everything. It is changing everything. And the question is, I believe it can be an enormous, wonderful game changer for people that have less. Because if you can bring AI tools to a home care worker that was making $15 an hour and giving them new ability to do new things in a way they would never had the ability to, it could raise their knowledge base and their income potential. So I believe AI could take things in a whole new direction for those that have less.
Does CCA Global have a team trying to figure out how to make AI and automation work for the benefit of low wealth people as opposed to their detriment?
Yeah, so I'm working on an initiative with the International Co-op Alliance called Principle 6. And for those, you know, the co-op world works under 7 principles. Principle 6 is co-ops working with other co-ops. And so we're working on actually, with the International Co-op Alliance, building a co-op of co-ops globally. So it's taking co-ops, and AI is one of the foundations of it. So it's taking and building AI infrastructure and making it available to all co-ops that they would own. So it's sort of like, because every organization does need to develop their own tools and their own thing. You know, everybody can't have their own chief technology officer, and even those, it's so complex today. You need the really good ones. And so how do you do that by a cooperative method? And so we're trying to actually have AI delivered by owning, a cooperative would own it, and people would join the cooperative and use the tools they need from AI as being part of the cooperative.
Bethany, can you hear us?
Oh, yes, it's so exciting to hear this presentation because a couple of years ago, we helped raise almost $900,000 to help all the licensed childcare centers in the state be part of CCA Global. And it's just saved millions of dollars. It's been a transformative experience. And the trick I think we're trying to do now is, you know, how to get the rocks involved a little bit more. I talked to Paul Bradley about it. He said a little bit trickier with rocks, but it's something to think about in the future.
We might have time for maybe one more, and that's it. Amanda, I sent you a trade here again.
Yeah, just quick question. What is the most significant difference between the business co-op model and a franchise model?
So franchise it's a good question. A franchise is a franchisor. And a franchisor, in essence, owns the brand, owns things, and in some ways, it's like a landowner owns your land. They own all the intellectual rights of what you're doing. And they give you the right to use their product, whether it's a McDonald's or any other franchise. You know, you use their tools and you pay them a commission. And they take the profit, and the big franchisors are all public companies. In the cooperative model, you know, the people using it own the company. There is no franchisor. The owner of intellectual property is the cooperative. So in all our cooperatives, you know, the cooperative owns the brands or the product categories or the training. Or there is no third party. It's owned by the people who used the product.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh, okay,
This has been
Steve.
terrific. Do you want to stay with us, or do you want to?
I can stay.